Welcome to the Deep Dive. We give you the shortcut to being well-informed, maybe some surprising facts, and hopefully just enough humor to keep you listening. Okay, picture this. You're strolling down Bay Street in Nassau. The Bahamian sun's warm. The place is buzzing with life. And what immediately hits you is just this incredible diversity in people's faces. Like a real kaleidoscope, you see these deep, rich brown skin tones right next to, lighter olive complexions. And the hair is everything from tightly coiled and kinky to soft curls, waves, even surprisingly straight textures, facial structures, too high cheekbones, wider noses, angular profiles, and then bam, you might see these really startling blue or hazel eyes looking back at you and kind of defies easy categories. It's pretty arresting, isn't it? And this range, this isn't some random thing. It's not a deviation. It's really the essence, you could say, of Bahamian identity. So it makes you wonder, right? That's the core question for our deep dive today. How did such a vivid spectrum of looks come about in these islands out here in the Atlantic?
To figure this out, we've gathered some great sources articles, genetic research, historical notes, things that trace the history, the geography, the migrations. Okay, let's unpack this, our mission. To sort of understand the layers of history you can literally see in the faces of the Bahamas today.
Yeah, and I think before we even start digging into the details, it's crucial to understand that the Bahamas, well, they were never really isolated, not at all. These islands were, and still are, a major crossroads. Historically, they were this pivotal link between Europe, Africa, and the Americas through those big colonial trade routes. And that specific position, it profoundly shaped the people here. It makes it a really fascinating case study in how humans adapt and blend.
That makes total sense. A crossroads, not an isolated spot.
Okay.
Okay, so if we're going back in time, where do we start? Who are the very first people here?
Right, we have to start with the indigenous Lucayan people. They were the first inhabitants living here for centuries before any Europeans arrived. What we know from archaeology and, early descriptions is they typically had bronze skin, straight black hair, and sort of medium agile builds. Features really well adapted to the Caribbean climate. They were the original islanders. But then things changed dramatically. Late 1400s, the Spanish arrive. And that really kicked off the transatlantic slave trade. Over centuries, tragically, tens of thousands of Africans were brought to the Bahamas. Their genetic heritage mostly points back to West Africa, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, those areas. This was such a huge shift that by the 18th century, people of African descent were the overwhelming majority. And still today, census data shows over 90% of Bahamians identify as Afro-Bahamian. It's a really deep historical root.
Okay, so those are the foundational layers.
Mm-hmm.
Indigenous Lucayans, this massive influx from West Africa via the slave trade. But the story didn't just stop there, did it? Did things keep evolving?
Oh, absolutely not. It didn't stop. The human tapestry, you could say, kept weaving. After the Spanish and the African diaspora, you had European settlers coming in. Then a significant wave of loyalists fleeing the American Revolution in the late 1700s. They brought their own mix of European backgrounds.
Right.
And even later, smaller but still important groups arrived: Greeks, Lebanese, Chinese folks, each adding, new threads, new traits to the genetic pool. It really turned the Bahamas into what some researchers call a living archive of migration, which is a great phrase, I think.
Yeah, I like that.
And what's so fascinating is that these historical events weren't just dates on a timeline. They were literally shaping how people looked for centuries. Every face tells part of that story.
A living archive of migration. That really captures it. So, okay, if these faces are telling stories, let's decode some specifics. What about something as basic as skin tone?
Well, science backs this up. Bahamian skin tones mostly reflect that strong West African ancestry. That means high levels of melanin, the pigment, right? Which is a fantastic adaptation for the intense tropical sun. So yeah, the majority of Bahamians have medium to dark brown skin tones. A beautiful spectrum, really, designed for the environment.
But here's what I find really interesting, and maybe you see this too.
Mm-hmm.
Even within the same family, the variation can be huge.
Right.
Siblings can look quite different in complexion. How does that work?
That's genetic recombination doing its thing. It's like shuffling a genetic deck of cards.
Okay.
You get a different hand each time, even with the same deck, right? So one sibling might inherit more of the European genetic markers and have a lighter, maybe caramel complexion, while another sibling from the exact same parents might inherit more African markers and have a deep ebony skin tone. It's that unpredictable mix of DNA, a real roll of the genetic dice.
Wow.
It shows that blending in action right there within a family. But we also have to touch on something a bit more sensitive here. Historically, in Bahamian society, like in many places with a colonial past, lighter skin sometimes got associated with, well, privilege.
Right, that legacy.
Exactly. It's an unfortunate hangover from colonial racial hierarchies. Researchers who study the Caribbean call it shadeism, and they note this bias, sadly, still lingers a bit. It can subtly influence things like beauty standards, who gets represented in media, sometimes even class perceptions. It's important to acknowledge that historical weight, it's not just in the genes, it's in the social history too.
Yeah, absolutely crucial to understand those layers. And speaking of unexpected things, going back to those faces on Bay Street, eye color, that can be surprising too.
You're right. Most people probably assume, dark brown eyes across the board in the Caribbean. But that's not the whole story in the Bahamas. There was a genetic study, I think around 2017, that found something like 8 to 10% of Bahamians actually have light eyes. Hazel, green, even blue.
Really? 8 to 10%?
Yeah. It's often linked to European or mixed ancestry, maybe from those loyalist settlers we talked about, or perhaps later Greek migrants. So you can imagine someone expecting a certain look might be quite surprised to meet a Bahamian with deep brown skin and bright blue eyes. It really challenges those global stereotypes about what Caribbean looks like. Shows a much richer blended reality.
That's fascinating. It really drives home that living archive idea. Okay, let's broaden out again. Hair texture and facial features.
Yeah.
What's the range there? And is there cultural significance tied to it?
Oh, definitely. Hair texture is another area with huge variety, directly reflecting that mixed genetic history. The majority, because of the strong African ancestry, have tightly coiled or kinky hair. But you also see looser curls, waves, even straight strands showing European or other mixed heritage. And culturally, it's been significant. For a long time under colonial influence, Afro-textured hair was often, stigmatized, seen as unruly. But now, you have strong natural hair movements in the Bahamas celebrating braids, afros, dreadlocks. It's a powerful way of expressing cultural pride, reclaiming identity. It's like a visible statement of heritage.
Real reclamation.
And facial features follow a similar pattern. African ancestry contributes common features like, say, broader noses, fuller lips, high cheekbones. But the blending introduces so much variety, narrower noses, maybe some freckles, finer jawlines, especially in families with more mixed lineage. It honestly makes it almost impossible to pin down one single typical Bahamian look, because the diversity is the norm. Beauty there is really in all its varied forms.
Okay, and just quickly, what about things like height and general build? Does that fit into this picture too?
It does. National health surveys give us averages around 5'8" for men, 5'4" moderals for women, roughly. So pretty standard global averages. But again, there's variation. Many people with West African roots tend towards what's called a mesomorphic build, naturally broader shoulders, more muscular frames, maybe adapted for more active historical lifestyles.
Right.
Nutrition and environment matter too. People in urban areas, maybe with more access to Western diets, tend to be a bit taller than folks in more remote island communities, the out islands. And it's worth mentioning the Bahamas does have a fairly high adult obesity rate, around 31%. That's a modern thing, reflecting dietary shifts. And it definitely sparks debates locally about health, beauty standards, and cultural identity today.
So many factors weaving together.
Yeah.
Okay, let's circle back for a moment to the very first inhabitants, the Lucayans. Is there still any visible trace, any indigenous echo in the modern population?
It's there, but it's generally quite subtle in the overall genetic picture. The Lucayans were largely displaced or died out due to colonization, sadly. But genetic studies do show faint traces of indigenous Caribbean DNA remaining in some Bahamians.
Interesting.
What's also interesting is that historians often point out that certain cultural things, like canoe designs, maybe some food preparation like with conch, certain farming techniques, these actually survived more widely than the genes did. Still, you might occasionally see subtle physical features in some Bahamians, maybe straighter black hair than typical, a particular medium brown skin tone, maybe slightly almond-shaped eyes that could hint at that very deep foundational indigenous ancestry. It's like a hidden layer in the archive.
Wow. Okay, so we've mapped out this incredible diversity, this complex history. What does it all mean when someone tries to define a Bahamian look? Can you even do that, or is the whole idea flawed?
That's exactly the debate, and it's a really important one within the Bahamas. On one hand, some people feel Bahamians are distinct, easily recognizable. Maybe they associate it with darker skin, curly or coiled hair, a certain vibe, that Afro-Caribbean energy. They see a clear identity. But others argue really strongly against that. They say defining it like that completely erases the huge diversity we've just been talking about.
Right.
For them, the Bahamian look is its variety. That's the definition. Globally, yeah, outsiders often just lump Bahamians into a generic Caribbean look, which isn't accurate at all.
Right.
But inside the Bahamas, these distinctions are really discussed. Afro-Bahamians, white Bahamians, people of mixed heritage, they all talk about representation in politics, in the media, and especially in tourism, which is so crucial there. A key example is that whitening controversy you sometimes hear about. For a long time, tourism ads often featured models who were very light-skinned, sometimes not even Bahamian.
I've heard about that.
Yeah, and it caused significant pushback locally. People argued, quite reasonably, that it erased the majority Afro-Bahamian population from the image of their own country. It felt like it was perpetuating an old colonial view instead of reflecting today's reality. It touches on really universal issues of who gets seen and who defines identity.
It really highlights how identity is this living, breathing thing, constantly negotiated. So looking ahead, diversity isn't static, right? It's still evolving.
Absolutely. It's a continuous process. Demographers expect migration to keep shaping the Bahamas. You have ongoing connections and movement, especially from places like Haiti, Jamaica, Cuba. These communities are already a big part of modern Bahamian life, adding new cultural elements, new genetic contributions. And because there's a lot of intermarriage between different groups, it's pretty likely that future generations of Bahamians will have even more blended appearances, creating, new expressions of what it means to be Bahamian. Now, there are different views on this, naturally. Some people worry that all this blending might sort of dilute what they see as traditional Bahamian identity, maybe a loss of distinctiveness. But others see it as just a natural continuation of Bahamian history. The islands have always been crossroads, always been melting pots. And, from a scientific angle, genetic diversity is actually a major strength. Biologically, it makes populations more resilient to diseases, more adaptable.
Right, that makes sense.
And culturally, it just keeps enriching society, making it more vibrant, more dynamic. It really poses a big question for all of us, doesn't it? In our increasingly connected world, how do we honor specific histories and identities while also celebrating the beauty and the strength that comes from blending?
That's a really powerful question to think about, well beyond just the Bahamas. Okay, so let's bring it back home. Our original question, what makes Bahamians look so different? Well, it's that deep, undeniable African legacy, isn't it? Plus the enduring shadow of Europe, those faint but present echoes of the first indigenous peoples, and this constant dynamic flow of migration. It's a story written right there in cheekbones, skin tones, hair textures, eye colors. So next time you picture the Bahamas, try not to imagine just one face, one look. Instead, maybe picture yourself at Junkanoo, the big national festival, all that color and sound. And look around at the faces. You see a woman with dark skin and these striking hazel eyes. A man with lighter brown skin and tight curls. A child maybe with freckles, green eyes, and amazing Afro-textured hair. All Bahamian. Every single one carrying centuries of mixed history in their features, all moving together into the future. Now maybe the Bahamian story prompts you to think about how history, geography, and just people moving around, how that gets etched into identity not just there, but really everywhere you look in the world.